Welcome to The Point of View. It's your favorite current affairs show on television. On The Point of View, you get the right guests. We ask them the relevant questions on issues that matter to you. It's an interactive show. It's live, and we're happy to hear from you. If you're watching us on TV, you can send us a WhatsApp message on the number we'll put on the screen. And if you're watching us on social media, you can comment on the stream that's below what you're watching. So we have a two-part show for you tonight. We'll be joined live by the Minister for Information, Kojo Nkrumah, who's been, if you want, coordinating the press conferences for the COVID-19 response team. And he's going to give us an update on where we are with the fight, what are the key numbers, and how the lockdown is being implemented. And we'll later on be joined by Minister of Finance, Ofori-Atta, who's going to also tell us how to resuscitate the economy. Don't forget, the president said, we know how to bring the economy back to life, but we don't know how to bring human beings back to life. So the finance minister will tell us how he's going to bring the economy back to life. So when we come back, I'll tell you how I'm going to go about this. Stay with us. So before I connect to Kojo, I want to talk to you briefly about our Wear Your Mask campaign. So we believe that of the many things we've said, wash your hands with soap and running water, use a hand sanitizer. If you are coughing, cough into your elbow. Don't touch your face, don't shake hands, don't hug, and all of those things. One important factor is also wearing your mask when you go out. Now, the jury is really out there on the efficacy of the mask. So I called up a microbiologist who's also a development practitioner who's worked in a lot of epidemic zones. He's actually based in Shanxi, China. A few moments before I came on air, I called him and asked him, why is there a division on the mask between West and East? And why do all the people we see in Japan and China wear this particular mask or other masks when they go out? His name is Dr. Alex Apia Asante. I asked him one quick question about the mask. Let's hear what he said before we talk to Kojo.
About a few ancillary issues. Masks. So it's become a big issue, and we are encouraging our viewers and listeners to put on masks when they go out as often as they can, if they have it. What is the reason why in the East you would almost always see people in masks, whether in China or Korea or Japan, whereas in the West, you don't have that? Is it that the science is divided? Talk to me about that.
That's a very good question, Bernard. The science is slightly divided. As you already mentioned, there is some recommendation from somewhere, like the WHO says, if you are not having symptoms, you are not sick, it's not a mandatory thing. But the truth about masks is that masks protect life. Masks is very, very important. I'm talking to you as a scientist, because remember, the way this infection is spreading is by 3 ways. Actually, already people talk about 2, but there's a third way, which I'll talk to you about, which some Japanese researchers have recently been doing experiment, and they've shown it. And it makes sense when I explain it to you, that it's something we all need to be aware of and think about. The 2 ways is by, as you say, contact. As if you touch a surface which has got some viral propagules or viral particles, you would get the infection. If somebody like me who might have the disease and I'm in your vicinity, or like even as I'm talking to you like that, I sneeze, the particles which are coming from my nostrils and from my mouth would spread to you, and you will breathe it in, or it will splash on you, and you can get infected from it. So the role of the mask is to serve as a barrier. See that? The mask is to serve as a barrier to protect the droplets and propagules from an infected person from reaching you. So it's a good practice, whether you are sick or not sick, to have it. Because one, you will protect yourself from somebody who has got it. And two, if you have got it and you even don't know and you're going about, remember the incubation period, it takes between 4 to 5 days before people start even experiencing symptoms. And there's also another fact which people don't know. There are a number of people who go about having the infection who are asymptomatic. Asymptomatic in China like that, they calculate that about 5 to 6% of all the people who were infected were asymptomatic
carriers.
So if the person is asymptomatic, he's not going to be coughing, he's not going to be having the high temperature for you to know that this person is sick. So move away from that person. So you see, in such a situation, you protect yourself by having an appropriate mask, which in a sense makes sure that you are not exposed. I said I'll talk about the third aspect, which is quite fascinating. And this third aspect is what we call micro droplets. I said some scientists in Tokyo University, working in collaboration with the high vision company HNK, have done some experiment recently whereby they had people in a lab. So someone sneezing, and then they use high definition cameras and laser and high definition cameras to be able to record the movement of those particles which are coming from someone who is sneezing. And they found two things, that when you sneeze, there are bigger particles which will drop about a short distance from you. But aside from those bigger particles which are coming, there are micro particles or micro droplets which are 0.1 micrometer in size, very tiny, and they float in the air. And the work shows that they can persist and move in that environment for up to 20 minutes.
Wow.
See that? And so anybody who is within that closed environment where these micro droplets are circulating, you are going to inhale them, you are going to get those droplets falling on you, and you can get infected. So for your own safety, any way you can protect yourself, which thankfully there are masks with different mesh or pore sizes available for people to use. If you are ever in an environment where someone who is sick is, you put yourself in danger without a mask, and for that matter, particularly the medics, having a full PPE, a full gear, which would protect any effluent that is coming from that individual dropping on you. So masks are very important.
Well, so if you have a mask, wear it when you go out. And if you don't have one, you can sew one. On another show, I'll show you how to do it. Okay, so let's talk about our COVID-19 fight. First case, March 11. And today is 1st April. Let me connect to the Information Minister, Honorable Kojo Oppong Nkrumah, is also Member of Parliament for Ofori-Atta, on where we are with this, since he's been the one steering the communication. Honorable Oppong Nkrumah, good evening. Welcome to The Point of View.
Thanks for having me. How are you doing?
I'm very well. It's good to have you. So, today you held a press conference. What was the major highlight that you wanted to put out after your 8 o'clock press conference today?
A number of things. First was clarity on the enhanced testing program that we have started, and which is facilitated by the 14-day restrictions in Greater Accra and Greater Nkrumah. Then we also needed to respond to a very pressing concern, which is how we are taking care of the homeless and the vulnerable at this point in time. We had opportunity to also deal with one of the emerging issues, reports of security infractions, and how at the same time, the security agencies are enforcing the restrictions that have been imposed in the Greater Accra and Greater Region areas currently. And then we also, I wouldn't say launched, but we also activated a call center to provide more information on a retail basis, particularly also on PPEs and the availability at health facilities across the country, among others. Those were the major highlights, in addition to an update on our case count and case management.
Great. So let's start with the immediate aftermath of the president's announcement. It seemed as if there wasn't enough clarity. For example, you had to tweet that media people were exempted from the lockdown. The chief of staff had to issue some sort of letter for civil servants to know what to do. President's spokesperson had to tweet that bankers were exempt. What was going on with all of those different kinds of things happening at the same time?
So let's be very honest that we are all in uncharted waters. We are making the best out of a difficult situation. We have to be honest with that. We also have to be honest with the fact that in that short breath of time between, for example, when we ended the last committee response, the last meeting of the response committee, and the president's address, about 3 hours to prepare that address, etc. Not everything could have been captured in that short address he was going to give. And so it was necessary for us to flesh some of it out later, in particular through the executive instrument itself that gives life to the measures that he was announcing. But I think broadly, what we've done since then is to take some very firm, drastic, unprecedented decisions, try to provide as much clarity as we can on these decisions, and work towards implementing these decisions to the best of our ability. And I think together as a country.
Okay. Now, Kojo, most countries and the global platforms, when they are reporting on the cases, they have basically three main parameters. They will say confirmed, recovered, and then deaths. We seem to have added three more layers. So if you go on our dashboard, we have confirmed, recovered, discharged through home management, responding to treatment, critical condition, and death. I mean, why are you introducing that nuance where Johns Hopkins and other countries are all just using the three main matrices?
Again, at the macro level, and you are pretty familiar with economics, at the macro level, data is aggregated. What the world is interested in to report on the global stage is confirmed, dead, or active cases. But at the micro level, at the country level, we are also interested in providing as much detailed information as is useful to our citizens. So when we had no case, there was really not much to report. When you started getting cases and now they are crossing the 50s to the 80s and now into the hundreds, almost at 200 now, the cases are now in different categories. And we listening also to the feedback that citizens give us, especially about, is this a condition a death sentence? Is it that when you get it, you are dead? Or is it that when you get it, you are confined in some quarantine place where life is so, dark and poor? In responding to all of this, we have further nuanced the data that we put out to explain that out of the 195 persons who currently are confirmed cases, we have unfortunately lost 5 of them, but 138 are in facilities that are offering them treatment. Now, I'll explain why this is such an important nuance shortly. But apart from the 138, 49 of them have been discharged and are at home and are completing their treatment. And 3 are known to have completed treatment, tested again, and came out negative. Now, why are we nuancing particularly discharge for home management? One of the lessons we've learned from some of the other jurisdictions is that when this virus was still novel, people were just rushing to medical facilities. If you take Italy and other parts of the world, people were just rushing to the hospitals. At a time when globally PPEs are in short supply, when you have people rushing to the hospitals as their first port of call, you're going to end up infecting a lot of doctors and nurses and healthcare workers. And one of the lessons is that in Italy and in many other places, they have had huge numbers of healthcare persons who have been infected. Secondly, the healthcare infrastructure gets overrun very quickly because this is a sweeping wave of a flu of this kind. It affects a huge percentage of the population. And if everybody, the global number of persons who are affected, are all rushing to the hospital out of fear, out of panic, out of genuine conditions that require care, very soon, no matter the kind of health infrastructure you have, it will be overrun. In Italy, people are sleeping in hospital corridors, on stretchers, etc. That's another learning that we have had. And so in the Ghana response, if you check out the preventive part of the Ghana response and you deal with the case management side of the Ghana response, one of the first things that we are saying is that we want to treat as many people at home as is possible. So if you have somebody who is tested positive, who is asymptomatic, who, when you risk profile, can be treated in the confines or in the comfort of their home, we don't need to rush that person to the hospital and occupy a bed. So that person can be treated at home. Invariably, also, what it means is that if you have somebody who was in a treatment center and who has improved so significantly that he can now be given home care, we don't need to keep that person there, because the data also shows us that there are a lot of people who actually pick up the infection or get reinfected while they are in the treatment center.
Could this be because we don't have enough ventilators? I think the minister said we have 67 in the country, and also we don't have enough ICUs. So part of your strategy is to keep as few people as possible in the hospital. That's why you are happy to let people go home, even though the extra 2 weeks is not done for them to be officially cleared and recovered.
Because if you have no need to be in a hospital in an ICU, let's say you are not having respiratory failure, your lungs are fine, you are having mild symptoms, there is no reason for which we should keep you in an ICU or even keep you in a general isolated ward for treatment. If you can be managed at home, it's better for us to free up those ICUs and isolated wards that can then take somebody who really needs it. Okay. So we have further nuanced our work in that way. And that's why you notice that some persons are being managed at home, about 49 of them. 138 are in facilities and they are responding. We don't have anybody in an ICU. And we think it's important to detail out all of this information so that people also get information of what we are doing.
All right. You announced that you've done about 4,300 tests since tests began. And that's over a 21-day period. So you are testing on average 200 and something people per day. I mean, you've announced that you're going to rack up testing. Are you able to... how many people are able to test in a day if needs be? Because, I mean, some countries are doing 500,000 tests. Based on the test case we have, if you are pushed to the wall, what is the maximum number of tests you can do per day?
So we are ramping up our ability to process the samples that are captured. And let me take you back a little bit. First of all, you need to capture respiratory residue sample, which is not too difficult to do. There are various ways. You can do one through the nose, you can capture one through the throat, etc. But once we have a good respiratory residue sample, we are good to go to the lab. Now, the problem really comes up in the labs. So far, it's only KCCR and Noguchi that have had calibrated machines that are able to process the samples. So you can have a backlog. You can pick 10,000 samples, 5,000 samples, but you can only process on the machines that we have a certain number of samples a day. What we've had to do is to bring on board other labs that have similar facilities, mostly used for tuberculosis and other respiratory-related issues. And I'm informed that there's a third lab that is currently able to process, which has been added. There are a number of other labs across the country. I think this third lab is a Ghana reference lab also. There are a number of other laboratories across the country that have similar PCR machines that can be used, and they are going through the process under the supervision of Noguchi to calibrate those machines so that they can assist us to ramp up our numbers. The next line is that you could also, and it is being discussed now, save more PCR test kits by using the general coronavirus rapid test to eliminate negatives, because that test only shows you that this person has been exposed to the general coronavirus. It doesn't tell you that this person has been exposed to COVID-19. So you could speed up the process by eliminating all the negatives with that one, And then, therefore, only the positives are the ones that go here, which means that you end up reducing or making more efficient the numbers that require the use of the PCR test.
Okay.
So it's a combination of these two that we are looking to use to help us achieve that about 50,000 tests that we have targeted to do over at least the next about 4 to 6 weeks.
You've said that you are not doing compulsory mass testing and that what you're doing is contact tracing in Ayawaso West, Wejagbawe and Kumasi. But some people keep sending us messages that when officials come to their homes, they are telling them not to go out and that they will test them compulsorily. So just explain what's going on. What's the difference between the compulsory contact tracing and a compulsory mass testing that you say you are not doing?
Okay, so there's nothing like compulsory contact tracing. There is contact tracing for persons that have tested positive. If you, Bernard, touch wood, test positive today, we will have a conversation with you about the closest persons you have engaged with, let's say in the last 5-6 days since you possibly started exhibiting symptoms. Your cameramen, your producers, your wife, your kids, etc., will form an inner circle or a primary circle of contacts. The tracing of contacts is the process of sitting with you and getting an understanding of who these persons are and finding them. So contact tracing for our about 79 cases in compulsory quarantine plus 10 cases in Tamales compulsory quarantine is about finding out the people who have come into contact with them so that we can test them. Remember, at first, the WHO learning was that wait for between 10 to 14 days to observe signs and symptoms because not everybody gets symptomatic and not everybody's infection can very easily be present in the residue. But as they have improved even on their testing protocols and knowledge, we are now able to test even if you are not symptomatic or up to 14 days. So contact tracing is to allow us to find this pool of about 1,000 plus persons who have been in direct contact with the first domestic surveillance set of cases and test them. And already, a limited number proved positive. The second level is that, as I mentioned, these about 89 or so, there were policemen, military men, government officials, health workers who supported us to do the mandatory quarantine. We need to, again, trace all of these persons, which we have done, and ask them to provide samples. Many of them have done it. As at tonight's review meeting, we were of the view that we are close to wrapping up on the number of samples we have to get from this pool. And then now you go to a third layer of persons who have been in the country for less than 14 days, but did not come in before the mandatory quarantine started. Again, they as well, you need to trace them and test them. So if you have these three layers, the final layer is that whenever you go to a place to test, you don't just go that we're looking for Bernard Avle to test him. You also want to engage persons around Bernard Avle so that should he turn out positive, we don't now need to come back and start contact tracing around. Okay. So this is an enhanced version that we are talking about. Admittedly, not all the information going down to our teams, etc. We have 500 teams that are doing contact tracing between Greater Accra and Greater Kumasi. Some things get lost in the scheme of things. Okay. Like I mentioned, we should be honest. It's an uncharted place in which we are. And we are doing our best to get them to understand so that they also communicate clearly to the people.
All right. Let's talk about the BOG hospital. The minister today said that it would be open to only BOG officials and VIPs. I mean, how does that work?
I think the Bank of Ghana has issued a statement tonight. First of all, acknowledging that they have been in contact with the Honorable Minister or the Ministry on this matter. If I just may read for the benefit of your audience a copy of that statement I saw the Bank of Ghana issue. Says, the Bank of Ghana has taken note of media reports following comments by the Minister of Health in respect of the use of the bank hospital for the treatment of COVID-19 patients. The bank confirmed that it has been in discussions with the Ministry of Health to agree on an arrangement to avail part of the facility to assist in the treatment of severe and critical cases of COVID-19. This arrangement will be available for the benefit of the general public. The bank wishes to assure the public of its support of the national effort towards the management of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's under the signature of Sandra Thompson, Secretary to the bank, issued on the 1st of April. And I think the bank provides some more clarity that no, it is not about VIPs or BOT staff.
So the minister got it wrong. Your colleague.
I think he probably misspoke, and the bank has provided some clarity.
Okay, brilliant. Now, the president's doctor announced today that he had tested negative. A lot of people are asking. President went to Norway and came back around 3rd or 4th March. A test doesn't take more than 2 days. In fact, you told me a test can take less than a day. How come you are announcing his results on the 1st of April, 3 weeks after he came back from Norway?
No, because he wasn't tested when he came back from Norway.
Why wasn't he tested when he came back from Norway? Because Norway is a major... In fact, when the Norwegian minister came, his case was announced on 11th of March, 1 week after the president came. So even if you tested the president within that week, why are you waiting till 1st April to tell us the results?
No, he wasn't tested during that week. I think you heard his physician talk about the fact that I think a day before his birthday or so, that's when this enhanced testing program, etc., started. Remember that the old WHO guidance that we were all working on essentially was a 14-day observation period. And we were not even doing enhanced testing at that point in time. It is as a result of the proof of concept that we did with the 1,030 plus 10 that has given us this view that we have to do this enhanced test. At first, what we were doing was just observation. We're not even doing this aggressive testing. As we have started, that is how come the president and his close associates, his secretariat staff, etc., have been tested. All of us who are participating in the exercise are also being tested, and we'll be probably doing it on a regular basis because we come into contact with front actors as well.
Finally, Kojo, we've followed most stories across the world. If you listen to Dr. Fauci and President Trump for the U.S. yesterday, they said that they are expecting between 100,000 and 200,000 people could possibly die. That's their scenario. What is GOG's best case scenario and GOG's worst case scenario based on the models I believe your mathematicians and your epidemiologists are discussing with you?
Well, there are still different views on worst case and best case. And the guidance is that they allow at least the first week of the enhanced testing and the results from it to begin to determine a certain median point of the two sides that are being discussed. And I'm hopeful that by that time, we can, in the context of not scaring people per se, shape expectations when those first set of numbers come in. And we have to be careful how we do that.
All right, we'll leave here. Thank you very much, Honorable Kojo Oppong, Minister for Information, speaking to us from his office at 9:28 p.m. He's working very hard. We'll take a break. When we come back, we'll read some of your comments. Then I'll now talk to the man who's been given the task to bring back the economy to life. The president said, we don't know how to bring people back to life, but we can bring the economy back to life. We'll be asking Ofori-Atta how he's going to do that. Stay with us. Welcome back to The Point of View. So we finished with Kojo Oppong, Minister for Information. Here are a few of your quick comments. Good evening, Bernard. I want to find out from Honorable Finance Minister when those of us who have invested with fund managers will get our money. Another one from Zampa Kumasi. Bernard, good evening to you and your viewers. My major worry about the government's handling of this coronavirus is more talk, less action. And it's all about the PPs. The frontline workers are complaining. Yet we have an Honorable Frema Prempeh defending that we have enough PPEs. Where are they? Again, please let my brother Kojo Oppong know that it's not about talk, but empirical action. That's what we need. May Allah bless you. Okay, so I caught up with the Minister of Finance a few moments ago, previously, and asked him a few questions around how he was going to resuscitate the economy. The first question I asked him was, so what really are you asking Parliament to do? Because the President also asked you to redraft the economic impact assessment for the COVID-19 based on a lockdown. So let me take you to that interview.
The President directed you to do the assessment less than a week ago, and you've put it together. It looks like a very precious time. Just give us some quick background as to how you put it together and what are the most important highlights for you.
Okay, great. Thank you. I mean, I think once this thing started unraveling in China, you know, one was really, as a ministry, compelled to begin to look at it in one way or the other. And then as the event started unfolding, aim was to begin, because clearly we were doing maybe about 2-point-something% of our GDP with regards to trades, exports and imports, combined maybe 5 billion with China. So we knew it to have an impact and the way in which our traders are working. So we then began to look at the potential shortfalls in petroleum as petroleum prices kept plummeting, look at the shortfalls in import duties, given that trade had been compromised, and therefore the consequential shortfalls in tax revenues domestically, and what the expectation of an increased health sector expenditure was going to be looked at. And the closing of the markets, i.e. with stock markets plummeting and the volatility, one knew that one could not get to the market for that. So that really pushed us to begin this whole process. And the president then asked us to look for $100 million to begin the health preparedness. And so that also put us onto high gear. And that's what led to that. So essentially in Parliament, I was just trying to make the nation aware that given that we had assumed a price of $62.6 per barrel for the budget, and now we were 30. We knew that in effect was going to be about $900 million equivalent of lost revenue right there. We then also did the estimate to look at then the consequential shortfall in the ABFA, and that also led to somewhere around 1 billion, 1.5 billion, and then transfers to GMPC, another 640 million. And then the non-oil economy expected that we're also going to lose about 2.2 billion. So really that put everybody on pulse as to what this year is going to be like. The question then becomes, how do you try and mitigate? Because all in all, then it looked like, maybe a 7.5% budget deficit if we were to look at the losses that we had. So the ministry quickly then began to look at the options that we had. And IMF look at our donor community, look at our own resources first and foremost, and see how we could respond. And that is because Bernard, if you contract from a 6.8% growth to potentially 2.6%, and in a complete lockdown situation to 1.5% growth, we are talking about something that you might even call apocalyptic. And so we need to do things differently. And that is what then led to our discussions with Parliament, suggesting the interventions such as looking at the Ghana Stabilization Fund. It's something that we should look at to be able to appropriate about $218 million, which then will fund what we call a bits of alleviation package. And then we looked at some non-marketable securities at the central bank that we pay interest on, and to defer that for a certain period to give us a space. Look at the Bank of Ghana Act, which allows government to borrow up to 5% of previous year's revenue, and see whether that could be expanded in the event that we need to do a lot more QE, that's quantitative easing, adjustments, already, constrained goods and services and capex to see what we can get from that. And then talking to the IMF has responded quite strongly with something they call the Rapid Credit Facility, which they use in the emergency in Mozambique when Hurricane Ida came. But this has been open to all of us, and we quickly took advantage of that. And I think we are one of the first countries really there, simply because the nature of this pandemic It's so wide-reaching and far-fetching that this is no time to be restrained in where you go to find resources. Also, speaking of the World Bank, on two fronts. One, when the president asked for $100 million, which of course was not in our appropriation, one has to find it from somewhere. So even as we began to use Ministry of Finance's contingent fund to be able to fund that, also went to the World Bank with their new facilities to help COVID-19 countries to see what we can do. Unfortunately, that we also moved very quickly there, and we've already received $65 million in our account. And I believe that $35 million, once I put that in Parliament with the Minister of Health, and hopefully to be passed by Parliament, and next week we should secure that. So that will be the $100 million there. And then we are looking at a budget support facility of somewhere between 350 and 500 million, also with the World Bank. So what the government has been able to do in short order, in this sense, Stabilization Fund as a point of first call to look at what we get from the IMF, from the World Bank, so that at least we can make sure that we are able to support our programs and keep body and soul together.
Okay.
on a national basis.
So when you say the pandemic will cost us 9.5 billion cedis, what percentage of that, based on what you've just said, have we raised? Because you've just given me a breakdown of some of the things you're doing. What percentage of that are you sure you will get, and what will be left by way of a gap?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, this moves us to a deficit of some 7.8% of GDP. And so that is what we want to claw back if we want to get back to our 4.7%. But as we all watch TV, it is unfolding, So the question for countries like ours, without much savings, is where you go to find support for the economy. So we are going to maybe have to be a little bit more liberal. Deficit financing, which, in the West, they will call quantitative easing. And that is why I put Parliament on standby as to the possibility of looking at the Bank of Ghana Act so that we can respond appropriately. I think it is that same thought process that then went into my discussions of the heritage, not in $1 million the Heritage Fund in our measures. It's not in, but really to let Parliament begin to debate the issue of what is the future and what is today, and therefore give the nation itself flexibility in times like this, which we haven't seen before. Because if you look at the nature of our budget, there's a lot of rigidity. And you remember when we came to Parliament in my first budget, I did require that, we create these caps so that we can have more resources for us. Or else really you work with a budget in which the finance ministry has no maneuverability, and it gets heightened in times like this. So I think it's a worthy debate about the future, and really to give Parliament, government, or Minister of Finance a little bit more flexibility if this thing continues the way it is continuing. So that was a sounding for that honest debate to go on, and for us to examine how we have been managing our budgets and our finances.
Okay. Speaking of rigidity and debate, the minority says that the first place you should look at is the size of government. that if you reduce that, you would save enough money, and that would also be a good example. What's your comment on that? It was debated after your speech yesterday. John Jinapong made that point in Parliament. What's your comment on that?
No, I think it's, clearly in times like this, nothing is a sacred cow. But honestly, when you are faced with an issue of this proportion, I'm not even sure that what he's talking about is much more symbolism than quantum, So quantum, it really will be, in my analysis, immaterial. I'll get you some numbers later, but I know it's immaterial. Symbolism, President himself has said that his 3 months' income should be put aside as opposed to a sign of that. In that same vein that he spoke, he could then have talked about, well, we parliamentarians are also going to see X amount of resources or, so that we feel like it's a nation that is moving in tandem. But this really is not a time when you see these very disturbing pictures to be political about this. But I'll try and get these numbers, but they are really immaterial. So if it's just for symbolism, well, there's something to be said for that. But really, I think we also see the need for effective stuff. Yeah. But I think, in this vein then is to shift to, what is the impact of this on our people? Because in the end, yes, we want to keep them alive. And these are models of ensuring that we beat this pandemic. But it obviously leads to certain hardships, water, distribution of food. Bernard, we have about 23.4% of our people who earn under quote-unquote $400 a year. That's about 1,700 CDs a year. Okay, that's 23%. So that's on 7 to 8 million people. And you also know that 90% of our businesses are SMEs, where we don't know where they are, informal. So in situations like this, the challenge of how do you get resources who earn money on a daily basis to be able to fund their livelihood becomes a really pressing issue. And this is where, we are looking to work with the phone camera because we need a model sense. So can I assume that everybody who makes maybe 10 CDs of phone calls every month falls under a certain category, and how then can I get resources to them? So those are things that are really uppermost. We fortunately signed a partnership agreement with the churches and with the unions. The churches have, quote unquote, the largest branch network in this country. How can the Ministry of Finance work with them to ensure food distribution or water? Because in the end, yes, the economy, I have to find ways of finding resources, but my best resource for the future is the people. And that's why the question of the heritage also comes into being. Can you keep these people, our people, alive for us to have a future? That then becomes the new question that we have to address.
Now, what will this mean for the priorities you set out in the original budget? For example, this is the year of roads. There was a big infrastructure agenda you announced. Now that you are talking about social support, helping poor people, will that mean that we should be prepared for a change in focus of the budget from capex to more consumption and also social intervention in type of expenditure?
Possibly, and I think that's a really good question, and you can see from the president's speech and from what I'm saying, the concern. They are not mutually exclusive, but it is a time of sacrifice and it is a time of understanding. I mean, sometimes when I hear some of the radio chit chats or people calling in, you sometimes wonder whether they've divorced themselves from the reality that this could lead to some serious death. And therefore, there are things that are going to be uncomfortable. We already run a country that has a lot of inefficiency. So some of those will be accentuated, okay? But ours is to find ways to mitigate that. So the question then is, should I use that one cedi to get a water tanker to you, or should I use that to fill that pothole? Then that becomes choices, okay? And so I think there's a lot of things in play, depending on the severity that we are going to experience, but one also has to keep one's eye on the ball to make sure that you do not derail everything that you are doing. You know, we've been doing so well, and we thought, well, this year all I had to manage was election year non-expenditure. And then Corona comes by and just has empires on their knees. And then you can then see the impact it has. But, you know, beyond that, I think this is where, you know, the Lord has blessed us because these 3 years has brought sort of Ghana's ascendancy in the global sphere. So you can see the president's messages resonate globally. It has also helped us as finance minister, therefore, to lead with the South African finance minister and the UN East Director for Africa about a number of meetings that we have had with the finance ministers in Africa, trying to reposition this whole global architecture that is this the most fit for purpose architecture for us. So we are pushing for debt relief, we are pushing for postponement, payments, etc. And that then would allow a lot more fiscal space for us to make sure that we just don't get wiped out during the season. So yesterday's Financial Times, I think there was an article in which, you know, I had proposed a number of measures on the international scale. So fortunately, I think we are beginning to build a consensus globally as to how to manage these. And we are just going to have to relook at all the fundamental assumptions of the budget. And I did signal to Parliament that come July, we should come with maybe a lot more information and analysis so that, you know, because what is the new normal? It's what we have to ask. What is the new normal, and how do we address the pain that invariably is going to occur in a human way? So, and you remember from the first budget, we talked about preferential option for the poor. You know, remove these taxes, let people do what they want. And now we are just coming down to the bottom of Maslow's curve, saying, now, you know, keep body and soul together, at the same time, make sure infrastructure is being managed. These are difficult times, and I think it needs to sink in that there's a new normal.
So based on what you said, is it a good time to approach things like free SHS again, the question of means testing so that only the very vulnerable benefit, because now we are having a lot of people's income distorted. So the conversation about giving free for everybody becomes a big issue. Again, questions around things like one constituency, 1 million as well. We are not in ordinary times, as you yourselves have said. Some would say you may have to put all those things on a different plate now and reassess based on where the wealth is. Would it be fair to say to all the political guys around the Flagstaff House that now let's put politics aside, let me do the numbers. When we are through, we can go back to political promises?
I don't want to be too presumptuous. Look, I really feel that we are a society with some divine touch. And the reason I say that is, Bernard, we came into government in 2017, out of nowhere, maybe because one was an investment banker. We had an investor put in 2.25 billion equivalent into our economy. Okay, unheard of. Okay, we went to the market in 2018 and we raised $1 billion odd dollars. In 2019, we came to the market for $3 billion. We finished, we went through this thing, and then Venezuela and Turkey blew up, and the market was closed. Okay, but we had gotten our resources. This year, something or the other, we went to the market in February. We finished, and then COVID came, and it was closed. So I am really positive that things would change. But I really would like to look through what would happen between now and July to be able to make such sweeping statements. Because those things that the president has thought of were well thought out for a reason of creating a modern society with a confident people who have the skill set. And that cannot be compromised, okay? Now, when you begin to talk about free education and means tests, etc., the fundamental issue is that no child should be compromised. Now, as to whether the parent earns or doesn't earn, there has to be some moral obligation to look at means of finding out whether that can change. But what really comes clear to me, and the only thing that I'm thinking about, and the Minister of Education is also thinking about, is the whole issue of digitalization and how that could maybe cut through the morals of a lot of things of our society, where I can find somebody to give a welfare check to easily, where I can make sure that I pay for a student's fees because he's there. That becomes quite clear to me. And that's one of the issues that the finance ministers are bringing in front of the World Bank and IMF, that let's get into a wholesale digitalization program which makes our systems a lot more efficient. So that counts. All of the others will see, how we as a people, with empathy for our people, to build a great society, are they going to debate it for that? But the president is clear on the reasons why we do this. We are going to hold on to them until we can't, okay? And then see what we can do.
Okay.
But it's a good time to question a lot of things in our society.
Great. Just two final points. You have the fiscal rule and your fiscal council. You were very determined to have a specific fiscal deficit. You were also talking about keeping debt within manageable, sustainable levels. We've already gone for 13 billion for the financial sector issue in the past 2 years. Now we have another 10 billion here. Is it time to say all those assumptions are out the window? We are going to start the targeting from scratch. So people should lower their expectations around your deficit, your debt levels, and all these numbers that usually point to good macroeconomic management, simply because this situation could not have been anticipated by anybody.
I think, everybody is re-examining their fundamental analysis. When you hear Angela Merkel talk that nobody should talk about budget deficits to her anymore, that's a huge shift for Germany, okay? And when you hear the head of the European Union talking about who do anything we have to do for the Europeans, and you see a 2 trillion package, those are almost academic, as if somebody just wants to hear something from my mouth. It's all of us as a society are seeing what it is. So what would be a realistic budget by July? I'm sure these conversations I'm having with you will lead to input as to certain beliefs and certain acts that we have and how those should be shifted and to give government flexibility to be able to respond faster and quicker, because in the end, keeping that one Ghanaian alive, is more important than that. So I think it's a good time for the society to coalesce and to be on the same page, because we're experiencing a certain shared pain, and we are clear that the people should be first. And so we'll continue on that.
Okay. Finally,
So that was Ken Ofori-Atta. I spoke to him earlier on. And I think the key point there is that, look, in July he will present a new budget. So a lot of us are hoping that this would not go beyond July. Let me read some of your comments as well. Bernard, my investments are locked at Gold Coast. I am hungry. And now there's lockdown. My business is closed without any salary. Can you appeal to the government to release money so I and my family can survive during this coronavirus and lockdown period? I beg you. This is Kenneth from Elmina. Bernard, I'm Umar from Medina. I'd like to commend the Information Minister for the splendid work he's doing for Mother Ghana. However, the military men should be advised to exercise restraint in dealing with the citizenry. They should do more verbal caution rather than corporal punishment. Hi, Bernard, good evening. Please tell the Minister of Finance that some of us, it's not COVID-19 that will kill us, but depression. My money has been locked up at First Bank and the government is doing nothing about it. I'm a single mother with 2 kids and only God knows how we will survive in the lockdown period. Dorcas in Accra. Godfred in Wager wants to know whether markets can be open 1/4 capacity daily. Bernard, I'm watching from Geneva. I believe the current leadership is doing a good job, but a nationwide lockdown, no matter the consequences, will have been in the people's interest in fighting this pandemic. Good evening, Bernard. Please ask the finance minister when customers of defunct fund managers will be paid, since we are going through double agony. Guys, I asked him about the amount they spend. They've already spent 13 billion. He says he needs 9.5 billion, and he doesn't have all the money. He wants to use our Heritage Fund, which is around $300 million. And a lot of people don't think that's a good idea. So I think that in a nutshell, he's basically saying the answer will come in July, because that's when we'll see the full extent of the problem. Because the key question was, how are you going to revive the economy? Well, you need to know the size of the problem, then you can estimate the solution. And it's basically saying that in July we'll see an answer. We're in April now. Good evening. Let me commend the president for his quick and swift measures. His swift and quick measures. Ghana is overcoming COVID-19 in the nearest